Onto the United States now. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, has voted pretty much along party lines on Thursday to repeal landmark 2015 rules aimed at ensuring a free and open internet. Now, that move is setting up effectively a massive court fight, and it has potential to recast the digital landscape as we know it today. Now, the approval of the FCC chair, Ajit Pai's proposal marked a victory for internet service providers like AT&T, Comcast, Verizon Communications, because it hands them the power to decide what content consumers can access. Democrats, Hollywood celebrities, companies like Google's parent, Alphabet, even Facebook, they all urged Pai, a Republican appointed by the US President Donald Trump, to keep these rules in place, which effectively bar service providers from blocking, slowing access to, or charging more for certain content. Now, consumer advocates and trade groups representing content providers have planned a legal challenge aimed at preserving those very rules.
I have heard from consumers who are worried, given that their broadband providers has already shown that they will charge inscrutable below-the-line fees, raise prices unexpectedly, and put consumers on hold for hours at a time. Who will have their best interests at heart in a world without clear and enforceable rules, overseen by an agency without any clear authority? Would that agency be a toothless FCC?
The internet has functioned without net neutrality rules far longer than with them. Nobody can name more than a handful of examples that occurred over the course of an entire decade prior and that were readily dealt with, whether actual violations or not. The legend of a cable company trying to break the internet may make a scary bedtime story for children of telecom geeks, but it isn't reality.
All right, then some in fact are describing it as a day that net freedom did die. Let's find out exactly what happened. Leah Duncan is live in New York now with more data on this story. So from the perspective of the current FCC chair, Ajit Pai, what exactly is wrong with the current system where all traffic is treated exactly the same way? Did he quantify what harm supposedly it has done?
Robert, thanks so much for having me today. Now, Pai has argued that the 2015 rules were heavy-handed and stifled competition as well as innovation among these internet services providers such as Verizon and Comcast and AT&T, and it is actually favored content companies such as Netflix. He further argued that the internet was actually fine back in 2015 and more freedom should be placed back into the system. Pai has said that rolling back the rules will give providers stronger incentives to build networks, particularly in underserved areas, as well as to upgrade networks to 5G.
Indeed. So help me understand this. By giving private firms effectively the room, if not the right, to decide what content to prioritize and what not to prioritize, isn't this just censorship dressed up in a pretty package?
Well, you know, based on those that I've spoken to, some agree while others actually think it to a lesser extent. I spoke with the head of technology research at GBH Insights, and he does equate it to censorship. In fact, he thinks it's anti-technology and puts power into the hands of a few that could control, in theory, content distribution as well as blocking. Now, others that I've spoken to say they don't necessarily think it's censorship, at least in the short term, as many companies don't yet offer a paid prioritization, which basically creates these so-called fast lanes for big media companies. They think perhaps it might be more of a plausible argument longer term.
Indeed, and of course we've seen something similar like that happening in Portugal. But does this only benefit the country's large telecommunications firms, your AT&Ts, your Verizons and so on? Or are there other companies that are also likely to benefit from these rules being rolled back?
Well, you know, unfortunately, it's really hard to find any beneficiaries outside, you know, the 3 or 4 internet services providers, you know, the Verizons and the Comcast and the like. It's just, you know, there are just really no other beneficiaries beside these companies.
Indeed. One last question for you, Leah. We've already seen what happens in a market where there are no rules on net neutrality, like Portugal, for instance, where consumers pay more for data, and the only parties that benefit telecommunications companies and their shareholders. So given that and the existing distrust and behavior of U.S. telecommunications companies, what really is there to stop the exact same thing from happening in the U.S.?
Well, you know, that's clearly the major concern that we have here. The rollback really opens up Pandora's box, hence the reason that there's been so much opposition. I mean, you could end up with unintended consequences, as we talked about, such as consumers paying more, control of content, as well as prioritization. I want to point out a recent University of Maryland poll that was actually done last week of almost 1,100 registered voters. It found that more than 80% of the respondents actually opposed a repeal. So you get a sense of how people feel and how significant they think this rollback actually is.
Indeed. December 14th, the day the internet, for lack of a better word, did die. Leah Duncan in New York, thank you very much for that.